The vast open world of Fallout is one of the main things these games are known for. The world building elements all come together to form an expansive, living world. But life is anything but common in the nuclear wasteland. Other open world games may present life and civilization at every turn, but the only thing you'll find certain in the wasteland is death, and perhaps if you're lucky, the comfort that it will be quick. Rather than building up a living, breathing world, it would be more accurate to show a desolate, dead world. A stretching wasteland where the silence is only broken by the whistle of the wind blowing through the skulls of travelers before you. The buildings would be crumbling and the soil would be scorched. Of course, there has to be some civilization, no matter how small, otherwise you couldn't really have a role-playing game. So how is this desolation shown throughout the Fallout series? Fallout 1 would be the obvious place to start. Apart from 76, it's the earliest game in the timeline, meaning that at this point humanity hadn't started to properly rebuild yet. It can take days or even weeks to travel through the empty desert just to reach a settlement, and it's almost a guarantee you'll encounter something or someone that wants you dead. The desert may seem depressing, yet the cities are the real graveyards. Unfortunately, as with all the Fallout games, its depiction of the world is limited by the studio's capabilities. While in the game you'll rarely find anything taller than one story, the in-game art shows just how dead the cities are. The skyscrapers sit empty in the sky, half crumpled. You're alone in the sprawling graveyard with nothing but the wind to keep you company. It's no coincidence that the two cities in the game, that being Bakersfield and Los Angeles, are now called the Necropolis and the Boneyard. In conclusion, Fallout 1 does an excellent job of portraying a post-apocalyptic hellscape. Now let's move on to Fallout 2. Being set 80 years after Fallout 1, humans have started rebuilding. There's more civilization, but there's also more human conflict. Namely, the main antagonists of the game are the remnant of the government. Overall, Fallout 2 is much more of an alive game, and it's by no means bad for this. It's only logical, as time passes, humanity is going to win the war against the wasteland and rebuild. Where it starts getting confusing is Fallout 3. Set in Washington DC, it's obviously going to be more heavily bombed than Los Angeles. However, even 45 years after Fallout 2, the human population still seems to be rather small. This could be attributed to a few things like the higher radar or super mutant numbers, and the fact that there's not really any vaults to repopulate the area. But from the actual world space, Fallout 3 does a really good job of looking like a post-apocalyptic landscape. The whole area looks like a war zone. There's crumbling buildings and rubble everywhere. The location also works wonderfully for immersion of a burnt world, as DC is filled with recognizable monuments that highlight the difference between the pre- and post-war world. Now on to New Vegas. New Vegas is a special case. It seems to have a pretty good mix of civilization and desolate landscapes. While the general environment and settlements aren't completely destroyed, there is at least a reason for this, that being Mr. House and his defenses that prevented the vast majority of nuclear weapons from detonating in the area. Even still, the desert does account for the empty space. allowing the settlements to be filled with life. New Vegas is definitely a more alive game, but if you want Desolation from New Vegas, then look no further than Lonesome Road, the ultimate experience of Desolation in Fallout. You walk through an utterly destroyed landscape devastated by underground nuclear explosions and ravaged by harsh sandstorms. No one here is friendly, everything is trying to kill you save for your one companion who is merely a copy of a hopelessly lonely Eyebot whom you befriended a while ago. Lonesome Road remains to this day the best experience of Desolation in Fallout. But let's move on to Fallout 4. The problem I have with this installment, among many other things, is how boring the environment is. Because of the settlements feature in the game, there's very little active settlements in the Commonwealth, and maybe that would be fine if this game wasn't the latest in the Fallout timeline, and as well as Boston, at least the area we play in, being one of the least bombarded places in the current America we know of. It's really pathetic how poorly humans have rebuilt in Fallout 4. I mean, most buildings don't even look like they've been hit by nuclear weapons, they really just look aged. And Fallout 4 comes off as a really bad mix of the elements of previous Fallout games. I have to commend them on the glowing sea at least. While it would have been much more interesting if there were buildings still standing in the fashion of the necropolis, it's understandable due to the limitations of game development. The end product is still interesting, but it's rendered almost completely pointless as there's almost never any reason to go through the glowing sea. Instead of it being, say, in the middle of the map, acting as a barrier between the low-level areas and the high-level areas, or even having proper locations in the glowing sea, it's just dropped on the edge of the map with only a few quests that require you to go out there. Now let's move on to the newest installment, Fallout 76. There's not a heap to say about this game relating to Desolation. It's the earliest game in the timeline, so there's an abundance of life everywhere, and Appalachia was hit with less nuclear weapons as it's such a rural area. The game does give a nice mix of settings though. The forest region where you start out is the most normal area in the map, and the Savage Divide, which is the biggest area and where you'll spend the most time, is still a somewhat tame area for the nuclear apocalypse. The Toxic Valley and the Ash Heap are where the nuclear apocalypse sets in, even though the Ash Heap wasn't actually really changed by the Great War. The Mire and the Cranberry Bog are basically where nature has taken over the landscape. While I do think this actually is an interesting angle, and it does work okay, it's better if it's only kept to one game. But what about the buildings? Well, as Appalachia wasn't hit very hard, the buildings aren't terribly destroyed. I do at least appreciate Charleston having been destroyed by a flood, which was a nice touch. It's obviously going to get harder to get a good balance of civilization and desolation in future Fallout games, as the timeline will mostly move forward. I am at least excited to see how Fallout 3's DC will look in Fallout 76, as that seems to be a place we'll be going in the future. And remember, this is just my opinion. If you have something else to add, or you disagree with me, then feel free to express that in the comments below. As you probably noticed, I am about to reach 1,000 subscribers at the current time of recording, I don't think I'm going to make a video about it, it'll probably just be business as usual, but I thought I would acknowledge it anyway. Thanks for watching, have a good day.